Tonight, you're not following the sun as it climbs and declares itself king of the sky. You're watching for the moment it briefly disappears right at noon, in the most public hour of the day. Before you fall asleep, you'll stand at the zenith and feel a hinge open inside brightness. Follow Ra's solar bark as it slips downward without leaving a scratch, and enter the Cavern of Sokar, the detour the world above never notices. You'll hear how priests measured that secret turn with clocks and incense, how the crew spoke passwords without warmth, and why the brightest glare can sometimes be the thinnest curtain. The desert hums like a kill, steady and dry and unconcerned. A shadow shrinks to a coin at your feet and then seems to hesitate. Kiffy climbs straight up without bending, as if held by invisible fingers. Somewhere in a temple, a clepsydra counts the hour in careful drops, and a bronze nail waits to measure the noon shadow as if it were evidence. Everything looks normal bread still warms, linen still dries, and that's exactly the trick. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next quiet thinning of light will remember you there, half awake while the sun slips off stage and the world keeps smiling, because tonight's story doesn't begin at sunset. It begins when the day is brightest and the god quietly takes the back corridor. You might not expect the sun to have a secret door at noon, because noon feels like the most public hour of the day, the loudest, the most confident, the hour that stands in the middle of the street and dares anyone to question it. And yet, in the old Egyptian imagination, there is a polite suspicion that the brightest moment is also the moment when something slips away. Not with drama, not with a chase. More like a careful person leaving a room while everyone is staring at the window. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the air do its slow work. Let a small, ordinary sound, maybe a fan, maybe the distant buzz of a city, become a soft border around you. Imagine the desert humming like a kill, that dry, steady heat that does not argue with itself. Imagine a shadow shrinking down to the size of a coin. Imagine Kiffy, that temple incense, climbing straight up without bending, as if it is being politely lifted by invisible hands. Now we can stand at the hour of fullest glare, when the sun looks like it has done everything right. In Egypt, light is not only light. Light is a civil service, light has a schedule, light has a list of names to greet, and a list of names to avoid saying too loudly. At the very top of the day, the disk can seem so solid that it could be a coin pressed into the sky. But some priests imagine that even that coin has a seam, not a crack. A seam like a curtain pulled just a little to the side. They would say a hinge opens inside noon. The solar bark does not need waves for this. It slides downward without leaving a scratch, as if the air itself is a ramp that only gods can see. The world keeps shining. Bread still warms on flat stones. Linen still dries. A dog still finds shade and decides it is enough. But the pilot steps off stage, taking will and sight below, while the public performance stays perfectly bright. This is the kind of myth that does not interrupt your day so much as it quietly rearranges what the day means. So you follow the idea gently, like you would follow a line of ants without stepping on them. You notice the way noon can feel hollow for a blink, as if the glare thins and the air takes a slow sip. You mark it with breath, because breath is one thing humans can bring into any myth without needing permission. Inhale 4. Exhale 6. It's a small rhythm, and it fits inside a rib cage the way a simple spell fits inside a mouth. Somewhere in the old language, there are words meant to be clipped and rather practical, because the Egyptians were not always interested in poetry when they were trying to keep the universe from wobbling. They liked poetry, yes, but they also liked instructions. If you ever read a list of offerings on a tomb wall: bread, beer, ox, fowl, and scents, you can feel how much they love the calm comfort of enumeration. It's almost like an ancient shopping list that happens to be sacred. And at noon, When the sun takes its secret detour, the comfort comes from knowing there is a crew. They are not dramatic sailors tossing ropes and shouting over thunder. They are more like trained staff who have done this route 1,000 times and have opinions about the best way to fold linen. Sial holds perception like a lantern, steady and unshowy. Who keeps authoritative speech? Not loud speech, not exciting speech, just the kind of speech that makes a door recognize you. There is a sense in Egyptian myth that a name is a tool. You do not wave it around for fun. You use it to open the right hinge at the right hour, and then you put it away again. Mayhen is there too, the serpent who coils around the bark like living armor, which sounds intense until you remember a coil can also be a blanket. In some stories, he is protection. In others, he is simply the shape of readiness. If you've ever wrapped yourself in a blanket and thought, yes, this is enough protection from the universe, then you understand Mahan without needing scales. And there is the small scarab, patient and already rehearsing a birth it will perform later. That is the thing about scarabs and Egyptian symbolism. They are never in a hurry, even when they are associated with the sun's daily renewal. They roll, they push, they rearrange. They are the quiet workers of light. A scarab can take the grandest cosmic idea, rebirth, sunrise, the return of warmth, and introduce it with the modest confidence of an insect rolling something along the ground as if it is doing accounting. As the bark leans into the lightless turn, you can imagine tomb walls holding the map. Egyptians painted routes and registers, tidy horizontal bands, because even the underworld can be organized if you write it down carefully enough. You get something like a manual for darkness, who to greet, what to offer, where to look away. The strange part is that this secret detour is at noon, not midnight. Most people expect the sun's dangers to happen in the dark, which is a very human habit, but the Egyptians were subtle. They knew heat has teeth too. They knew glare can bite in its own quiet way. At high day, when everything is exposed, there is also the risk of being too visible, too thin, too dried out by attention. So the myth offers a shaded corridor inside brightness, a place where the sun can do maintenance without an audience. And that corridor, in this particular story, bends toward the Cavern of Sokar. Sokar is a god with the manners of a closed door. He belongs to Memphis and the necropolis, to the regions where silence is not a mood but a material. He is often shown mummiform, tightly wrapped, because there are forms of power that do not need to gesture. Sometimes he has a falcon head, sometimes he is more mysterious than that, and the mystery is not meant to excite you. It's meant to calm you like a room with thick walls. Inside the cavern, passages are not rivers but ribs, bending under impenetrable mountains. That word is almost funny in its seriousness, impenetrable, as if the mountains filed paperwork to become officially unenterable. And yet, the bark enters anyway because gods do not need to argue with mountain permits. The geography here is made of hush. Sand turns black and heavy, not in a horror way, but in the way soil becomes dark when it holds moisture. Time feels like a rope drawn through a narrow ring. Every movement is measured, not because someone is chasing you, but because this is a place where loudness is inconvenient. Torches sound loud, footsteps sound like a statement. Even your thoughts, if you bring them in, might feel like they're wearing boots. So the myth teaches a small etiquette: shrink your voice into fragments, touch direction instead of seeing it. Let attention become a hand rather than a spotlight. If you've ever walked through a museum where the lights are low and the guards speak in polite whispers, then you already know the vibe. The Cavern of Sokar is like the most ancient gallery, where every exhibit is a rule for staying alive. Above, on the surface, the temples keep their own steady beat, because the Egyptians loved synchronizing things. They watched the clepsydra, the water clock, letting drops count time the way a patient person counts beats. They measured a noon shadow against a bronze nail. They did not need modern minutes to be precise. They had decans, star groups that rose in turns, like a night crew that clocks in reliably. Even at noon, the sky's bureaucracy mattered. Names of caverns could be recited like oil on hinges. Titles were tools, not boasts. Incense was refreshed exactly once, because even pleasant smells can become clingy if you overdo them. There's something oddly comforting about that restraint. The brazier hisses the same note each day, like a routine that says, "You're safe to let your mind loosen now." And mirrors, this is a detail I love. Mirrors could be covered. Not because mirrors are evil, but because reflection is attention, and attention is heat. In the moment when the god changes corridors, you do not call out, you do not wave, you do not try to get a better angle. You cover the mirror the way you might turn your phone face down when you finally want a rest. It is the same gesture, really. A small refusal to be summoned. A quiet agreement with the idea that some transformations happen better without an audience. Down in the cavern, the work at high day begins. And work is the right word. Egyptian myth often makes divine action feel like maintenance, like the universe is a system that needs daily care. At noon, Apep Apophis, the great serpent of uncreation, can swallow in heat, not darkness. This is a gentle twist. It suggests that danger is not only what lurks at night. Sometimes it is what grows when everything is too bright, too exposed, too certain. Noon is when fangs remember roots to throats, the myth says, but we can keep that image soft by remembering what Egyptians did with such thoughts. They did not panic. They wrote a spell. They recited it calmly, like a clerk reading a form. They used names the way you use knots. Short, deliberate, pulled tight in the mouth. This is not a battle scene. It is a quiet office of cosmic security, staffed by people who know what to do. Knives come out as words. That's a very Egyptian idea to language as a blade, not because it is violent, but because it can cut confusion into manageable strips. Bindings are tied with breath and counting. Nets of flame are thrown in the mind's eye, then tightened with names that own the mesh, which is a delightfully bureaucratic way to describe magic. Imagine a net with a label attached, property of the correct name. Please return if found. The coil loosens without triumph. No cheering, no applause. The crew repairs their attention before their gear, because attention is the first tool. If attention frays, the whole boat feels it. If attention stays smooth, even the strangest corridor can be navigated like a familiar hallway. CL notes what is seen. Who files the phrasing for next time, because of course there will be a next time. The Egyptians did not imagine the cosmos as a one-time event. It is a daily process. Even creation needs repetition, like brushing your teeth, except the stakes are cosmic and the toothbrush is a spell. Mahan adjusts his coil, checking the rail, settling back around the gob like cool rope. There is no drama in it. It is simply what he does. And the scarab, always humble, tests the future body by rolling a seed of dawn between its forelegs. The seed does not need to sprout right away. It only needs to be held, turned, kept from being lost. That is a very sleepy kind of hope. Not fireworks. Just a small thing being carried. And then come the repairs and reignition, which sound like a mechanic's schedule, and in a way they are. Ra is combed with spells. Old age is poured off like hot resin that cools in ropes. This is such a specific image, and its strangely gentle age as something that can be lifted away in careful strands, not ripped off, not fought, just removed with patience. Paint is touched where clarate color. The prow is washed with a bowl of minutes. I like that. A bowl of minutes. Not a bucket of panic. Not a barrel of urgency. Just minutes, scooped and poured as if time were water and water were time, which to the Egyptians it often was. The timbers answer like a drum under cloth when pulse returns, muffled and calm. The boat does not announce itself. It simply becomes steady again. If your mind wanders here, that's fine. Minds do that. Think of amulets for a moment because Egyptians loved them and they were wonderfully specific. An Eye of Horus amulet could be placed on wrappings like a quiet instruction to the body, remain intact. A jet pillar could promise stability like a spine for the soul. A tiny heart scarab could sit on the chest and politely remind the heart not to get chatty in the afterlife. Imagine ancient artisans drilling holes in faience beads, stringing them with linen thread, tying knots that had names and purposes. It is the same energy as the spells on the bark. Small details doing big work without shouting about it. The kind of effort that makes you sleepy because it is reliable. Eventually, without a trumpet, the detour ends. The bark leans toward the surface of ordinary light again. And what is lovely is that life on Earth barely notices, except in subtle ways, like the world is blinking. Animals pause in shade and blink as if an invisible wind passed through their skulls. Water tastes briefly metallic, the way it can taste in a clay cup left too long in the sun. Flies slow down as if even they have a moment of reverence, or perhaps they are simply too warm to bother. A well's echo changes key by half a tone, which is the kind of observation an ancient person might make if they were the sort of person who listened carefully to things that did not ask to be listened to. Astronomers note a hush and glare of thinner gold that thickens again without moving. Merchants call it the short hour. Farmers call it the held breath. And scribes, ever practical, just mark a dot. I love scribes for that. The universe does something mysterious, and the scribe says, noted, dot, next item. You can imagine a scribe dipping a reed pen into ink. The ink, made from soot and gum, maybe a little water, stirred until it behaves. You can imagine the texture of papyrus, those press reeds, slightly rough, eager to catch the stroke. The scribe does not need to understand Sokar's entire cavern system to do his job. He only needs to record that something was different for a moment. That is another sleepy lesson. You do not have to solve everything to be at peace with it. Sometimes you just notice. Sometimes you just label. Sometimes you just let the facts sit in a jar on a shelf and keep walking. And because we like gentle rituals, we end with a small oath suited for noon, which is such a strange idea that it circles back into comfort. Keep facts in one jar. Sokar's cavern, noon's hinge, the crew's 3 tasks. Keep awe in another jar, small, labeled, steady. When brightness feels cruel, assume a corridor exists. Reduce your stride. Count to 12 if you feel like it, because 12 is a number the Egyptians enjoyed, and it fits nicely across a slow breath. Let repairs be routine, not spectacle. Tighten rope. Repaint edge. Speak the short names. And when the disc grows full again, drink water, unclasp the mirrors, and return to ordinary light as if ordinary light is also sacred, because in Egypt it often was. Now you can let the story keep thinning, like kiffy smoke that rises straight up and then forgets itself. The desert hum stays steady. The coin shadow grows, then softens, then disappears under something wider. A bark slides along a route that is not drawn for human eyes, and yet your breath can follow it anyway, one calm count at a time, until the need to follow anything at all becomes very small, and the bright world, with all its hinges and quiet corridors, simply holds you while you drift. There is something almost suspiciously organized about the way this noon detour works, as if the sun has been doing it for so long that it no longer needs to improvise. You would think a secret passage in the middle of the day would require a little panic, at least a little scrambling, but the old Egyptian imagination is not interested in scrambling. It prefers a calm crew, clean habits, and a universe that can be kept steady with the right names spoken at the right volume. So when the bright door opens inside noon and you feel that small thin moment where the disc seems to look hollow for a blink, you also feel something else moving into place quietly, like a hand finding the same latch every day. The crew that knows the shortcut doesn't look like a crew from an adventure story. Nobody is yelling into wind. Nobody is dramatically pointing at the horizon. The solar bark is not a celebrity yacht, even if the passenger is literally the sun. It's more like a well-used ferry with a sacred job, and the people on it have the tired competence of someone who has done the night shift for 1,000 years and still remembers where the spare rope is kept. See how it carries perception the way a careful person carries a lamp in a hallway at night, not to show off the light, just to make sure nothing gets stubborn, knocked over, or misunderstood. Who carries speech that has authority, but not the kind that raises its voice. It's the kind of authority that makes a door decide, yes, you may pass, and then immediately forgets it had ever considered saying no. If you listen close softly, comfortably, you can almost hear the way their roles fit together like two parts of a simple mechanism. Perception, then wording, seeing, then saying. It's a kind of ancient teamwork that feels oddly modern, like the calm handoff between two people in a kitchen. One finds the right spice, the other puts it in at the right moment, and nobody collapses into drama about it. It's just dinner. It's just the cosmos. If you're still awake for a few minutes, you can subscribe. Or you can let that thought float away like kiffy smoke that rises straight up and then forgets it was ever trying. I won't chase you down the corridor. I'm not built for sprinting in sacred tunnels. And then there's Mahan, the serpent who coils around the hull, scaly rail against what cannot be named in heat. That line always makes me smile a little because it's so honest. Some things the Egyptians felt shouldn't be named loudly, not because the world is fragile, but because names are powerful tools, and you don't want to swing tools around when you're sleepy. Man's coil isn't flashy protection. It's the kind of protection you can nap under. A coil is a boundary you can feel with your hand. It's a reminder that the edge exists. If you've ever tucked a blanket around your shoulders and felt your body immediately calm down, you understand, Mahan. The gods simply did it with a serpent because symbolism was their favorite hobby. A small scarab rides the prow, and the scarab, as always, is not in a hurry. Scarabs are the quiet workers of Egyptian myth. They do not need applause. They roll, they press, they rearrange. They practice the future in a slow and stubborn way. It's almost funny that such a grand idea, sun renewal, rebirth, the daily return of light gets represented by an insect that looks like it is doing patient, slightly dusty accounting. But that's also the charm. The Egyptians were able to hold huge cosmic concepts in their hands without squeezing them too hard. A scarab is a reminder that the universe can be maintained with small, consistent effort. Not speed, not panic. Just the steady push of what needs pushing. And the helmsman, there's always a helmsman, even in mists that pretend the boat moves by itself. The helmsman leans into a lightless turn that only the map on tomb walls remembers. That detail is gentle and eerie at the same time, but in the soft way, like a hallway you've walked in the dark, so many times you don't need to see it. The map is not something you hold in your hands. It's painted on stone in tidy registers, with names lined up like calm instructions. Egyptians love tidy columns. Even their gods seem to appreciate a clear layout. In the underworld books, what we call the Amduat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, the Book of the Earth, there are lists of regions, guardians, and hours, and it all feels strangely practical, like a travel guide written by someone who wants you to arrive without fuss. So you drift closer to the idea of that map. You imagine yourself in a tomb chamber where the walls are painted with boats and deities and lines of text that look like they remarching. You can't read it, not fully, but you can feel its intention. Do this, then this, speak this name. Don't stare too hard at that. The Egyptians were fascinated by knowing what to greet and what to leave alone. It's a very soothing boundary. Modern life sometimes asks you to stare at everything, respond to everything, absorb everything. The tomb wall says the opposite. It says, choose gently. There are things you can pass by without engaging. There are doors that open only when you stop forcing them. Ciel's lantern perception sweeps along the painted route, and whose speech follows, not as an announcement, but as a key. In myth, keys can be words. Sometimes keys can be silence too, but tonight, no, not tonight. We're at noon, at this glossy, steady noon. The key is a short phrase that the corridor recognizes. It's said that in Egypt, knowing a name was not just knowing a label. A name was a handle, a way to lift something. Isis learns Ra's secret name in one story, not through dramatic violence, but through an almost absurd amount of patience and cleverness, like someone filing paperwork until the universe finally sighs and stamps the form. You can feel that same bureaucratic magic here. Who speaks the password without warming it up, because some words lose their usefulness if you handle them too much? The shortcut itself is not a tunnel you can point to on a map above ground. It's more like a fold in reality, a hinge inside brightness. The boat slides, and the world stays shining at the surface, which is a very polite trick. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't even interrupt the ordinary routines of people who are sweating through their work in fields or markets. Somewhere, a baker is still sprinkling flour. Somewhere, a scribe is still correcting a line. Somewhere, someone is still fanning themselves and complaining, softly, in the shade. And the sun god, at the same time, is slipping down to do maintenance in a hidden corridor, like a person stepping into a back room to fix the fuse box while the party continues in the front. If you want a modern comparison that won't wake you up, imagine an elevator that only appears when the lights are at their brightest. Everyone else is looking at the windows, and you simply step into a quiet panel in the wall. The elevator doesn't ding. Nobody claps. It just carries you down to a place where the air is cooler and the rules are different. That's the feeling of this myth. It doesn't want to thrill you. It wants to reassure you that even the most powerful thing in the sky needs a moment to step away from being seen. And because it's Egypt, there are details, lots of details, because details are where the calm lives. You notice how the crew keeps the boat steady without rushing. The motion has a slow practice rhythm. Inhale 4, exhale 6, if you like matching your body to the bark. Little rhythms were a kind of technology and ancient ritual. They had water clocks dripping in measured ways, and they had decans rising in shifts, and they had calendars with festivals that arrived like familiar guests. Even the gods had schedules, and the schedules were not meant to stress you. They were meant to keep the universe from wobbling. You might think in such a secret detour that the crew would be tense, but their tension is not sharp. It's more like concentration, the kind you see on someone threading a needle, or on someone pouring water carefully so it doesn't spill. Man's coil tightens slightly, not in aggression, but in steadiness. The scarab, patient, continues rehearsing that future birth, as if dawn is already a small object that can be rolled into shape. Ciel watches for the exact angle where brightness becomes corridor. Who listens to the corridor the way you listen to a lock when you're returning a key feeling through sound and resistance, whether the mechanism agrees? And since we're drifting, let your mind wander for a moment to the little protective things Egyptians like to keep close. A wedget eye, the eye of Horus, could be painted, carved, worn, placed among wrappings because it promised wholeness and healing. A tiny jet pillar could promise stability, like a spine for the world. A small knot of Isis, the Tayet, could sit on the body like a quiet assurance that protection is not always loud. These objects were like portable versions of what the crew is doing now, carrying the idea of safety in small, tangible forms. It's comforting, really. It says you don't need a grand gesture. You need a small thing that works. The shortcut is also a social space in a strange way. The boat is a moving household, and Egyptian myth loves households. Even the great gods sometimes behave like a family with routines, ritual meals, careful greetings, familiar roles. On the bark, You can imagine small offerings being acknowledged, not because the sun god is hungry, but because offering is a language. Bread, beer, incense, these were not just foods. They were ways of saying, we are aligned. We are cooperating with order. We will not fling chaos into the corridor like a tantrum. That, too, is a sleepy lesson. Cooperation is calming. Order is calming. Not rigid order, but the gentle kind. The kind where everyone knows where the cup is kept. And the boat's crew, knowing the shortcut, also knows what not to do. They do not speak too long. They do not elaborate. In Egyptian ritual writing, sometimes a spell is clipped and direct, as if someone wrote it while trying not to spill ink. There's a dryness to it that feels like understated humor, even if it wasn't meant that way. Do not come. A text might tell a dangerous being, as if the being has good manners and might accept the request. Back away, it might say, with the tone of someone shooing a cat off a table. It's charming. It's also practical. In a corridor of Sokar, you don't want speeches. You want short names that function like nails hammered into place. So the helmsman leans, and the boat follows the remembered line. If you picture the prow sliding through a seam in the day, don't picture it as a dramatic tear. Picture it as a perfectly cut doorway in a wall that was always there, but only visible at this angle, at this precise noon. The Egyptians liked precision. They liked the idea that the world can be accessed correctly when you respect its timing. That's why the question, what time is it where you are, feels quietly appropriate. Time matters, but not in a stressful way. More like a keyhole cares what shape of key you bring. And if your thoughts start drifting toward your own day, toward what you should have done, or what you have to do later, gently borrow the crew's attitude. Notice how they keep their attention close, like a folded cloth. They are not solving the universe all at once. They are taking the next right turn. Seal sees the next hinge. Who speaks the next phrase? Main keeps the edge from fraying. The scarab continues its slow rehearsal. Nobody demands a conclusion. Nobody insists on closure. The point is the passage, not the applause. You can almost feel the tomb wall map under your fingertips now, the way carved lines can guide a hand even in low light. Imagine tracing a painted register with your eyes, following the bark's outline, seeing the small figures of gods with their labels, their titles, their careful gestures. It's like reading without reading, like letting the shape of knowledge comfort you. That's what these ancient underworld books were for, in a way, not to entertain, but to orient. To say, there is a route, there is a crew, there is an order that holds even when the sun steps off stage for a moment. And so the shortcut continues, smoothly with no rushing. The surface world remains bright, and the secret world remains quiet, and the crew moves between them as if this is the most ordinary thing in existence. A door inside brightness, a corridor under noon, a serpent like a blanket, a scarab like a patient accountant of dawn, a helmsman following a map painted for stone to remember. You can let that image sit in your mind like a small, cool bowl of water, and if you want, you can match your breath to the boat again. Inhale 4, exhale 6 until the bright hinge feels less like a mystery and more like a soft habit of the cosmos. The kind of habit that keeps going whether you watch it or not, which is, honestly, the best kind of habit to fall asleep to. If you follow the boat long enough, you start to notice something comforting about Egyptian cosmology. It doesn't only have places for thunder and judgment and dramatic speeches. It also has places that are almost aggressively quiet, as if the universe occasionally needs to put a finger to its own lips and say, gently, hush now. And the odd thing is that this hush can happen at noon, when the world above is loud with birds and heat and people pretending they aren't tired. Down here, inside the Cavern of Sokar, the quiet is not the absence of sound. It's more like a geography, a terrain you walk across, one careful breath at a time. The passages are not rivers here. That's the first sleepy surprise. You would expect the underworld to keep its water theme because Egypt loved a good river metaphor, and the Nile is basically the nation's favorite sentence. But Sokar's region is different. The corridors feel like ribs, bending under something called impenetrable, which is a wonderfully blunt name for a mountain. It's not misty peak of eternal longing. It's not the spine of the sky. It's just impenetrable. Like a locked drawer you've given up on. And somehow that makes it calmer. The myth isn't flirting with you. It's stating a boundary and letting you relax inside it. You might imagine stone then, hard surfaces, clean echoes. But the sand here is black and heavy, and that detail always lands softly. Black sand is not romantic. It's practical, like spilled pepper, like ash that has decided to be useful. When you step in it slowly, gently, it doesn't behave like beach sand. It behaves like weight, as if each grain has a tiny opinion about gravity and would like to share it with your ankles. Time in this place feels like a rope drawn through a narrow ring, not a clock with hands, not a bright ribbon unfolding. A rope, the kind that moves because you pull it, and it moves only as fast as you pull, and it doesn't care what you're thinking about while you do it. This is where Sokar waits, mummiform, a stillness with a crown, flanked by falcon masks that do not blink. That sentence alone feels like a lullaby for someone who likes eerie museum displays, and I mean that affectionately. Sokar isn't a god who leaps into action, he's a god who sits. He is funerary, Memphis-shaped, workshop and necropolis-shaped. If other gods are like weather, Sokar is like a sealed storeroom, quiet, consistent, and filled with things that have been put away carefully. In some places, he merges with Ptah and Osiris, becoming that long. Heavy name Ptah Sokar Osiris, that sounds like 3 co-workers sharing one desk in the afterlife because the budget demanded it. It's not glamorous, it's efficient. And efficiency, as you know, can be soothing. The boat slides into this ripped silence without splashing because there is nothing to splash. The prow doesn't cut water. It cuts attention. The air feels close, as if the corridor is not hostile, just intimate. Voices shrink to fragments here. That's another self-rule. You don't get speeches in Sokar's cavern. You get short phrases that behave like tools. A name, a title, a small instruction, spoken once and then put away. If you've ever tried to talk too much in a library and immediately felt foolish, you understand the mood. Even torches sound loud, which is a gentle little joke the myth plays on you. A torch is just fire on a stick, yet in this hush it becomes an overconfident percussion instrument. It hisses, it crackles. It announces itself like a person who clears their throat in a quiet room and then regrets being born. So direction becomes something you touch, not something you see. That's the odd comfort of it. Your mind likes sight because sight invites planning. Touch invites presence. You can't overthink a corridor you can only feel. The crew leans into this. Ciel's perception lantern doesn't blaze, it becomes narrow. Whose authoritative speech becomes even smaller, like a key you don't jingle. Mayhen's coil stays close to the hull, not in threat, but in a kind of steady hugging. The scarab at the prow continues its patient rehearsal of rebirth, even here, even in black sand, because scarabs are stubbornly optimistic in the most unexciting way possible. They don't believe in miracles. They just keep rolling. And because this is Egypt, the silence is not empty. It is catalogued. It has names. It has habits. Somewhere above, on tomb walls, scribes painted diagrams of these regions in tidy registers, as if the underworld were a well-organized archive. This is what always makes me smile a little. The afterlife as paperwork. Not stressful paperwork, necessarily. More like the comforting kind labels on jars, shelves that match the inventory list, instructions that prevent you from putting cumin where the coriander belongs. The Anduat and the books of the underworld describe these caverns as if they are meant to be navigated with care, and the care itself is a kind of devotion. You don't sprint through sacred geography, you fold yourself into it. If your thoughts wander, if you start thinking about your own day, your own bright noon, and the things you didn't finish, notice how the myth treats unfinished things. It doesn't punish them, but stores them. Sokar is a god of storedness, of being put away, of staying still until the right hour, the right word, the right corridor. That's not a bad lesson to borrow. You can set a thought down like a jar and let it gently. You can stop stirring the mental pot. You can let the spoon rest. The universe, in these stories, runs on pauses just as much as it runs on motion. There's something else, too, quietly strange. Apophis doesn't only belong to night in the Egyptian imagination. You might think the serpent of chaos would be most at home in darkness, but noon is when heat sharpens everything, and the myth remembers that things can appreciate bright weather just as much as gloom. That's a micro-hook that stays mild, I promise. No drama. Just the warm, sleepy idea that even chaos has a schedule, and that schedule might be inconveniently timed, like a neighbor choosing exactly lunchtime to drill a hole in the wall. The Egyptians respond, as they often do, with clipped spells and practical binding. Not panic, not heroic screaming. Just say the right thing, tie the right knot, keep going. And knots matter here. In Egyptian ritual logic, tying is a kind of thinking. A knot is a decision made with your hands. A spell spoken like a not short, deliberate, pulled tight in the mouth. As your topic map says, feels almost like advice for modern anxiety. Don't spin the thought into a long story. Pull it tight. Make it small. Make it manageable. There's a reason protective amulets often involve simple shapes, a loop, an eye, a pillar, a little figure that can fit in the palm. Your brain sleeps better when it can hold something small. So imagine the boat moving through Sokar's cavern as if it is being guided by texture. The air is cooler, but not cold. There's resin somewhere because Egypt loved resin the way modern people love good packaging. It seals, it preserves, it makes things feel finished. The smell is earthy and sweet, and it clings to linen and wood. The black sand absorbs stray sound the way thick curtains absorb echoes. Even your breathing feels like it has a softer landing here. Inhale 4, exhale 6, and the rope of time slides through its ring without snagging. The falcon masks that do not blink let your mind rest on them. Falcons in Egypt are often about Horus, about kingship, about sharp sight and sky authority. Here, the falcon forms become something else, quiet sentries. Not aggressive, just present. Their unblinking gaze is less threatening when you remember that statues don't blink because they're reworking. It's like the security camera of the sacred world, not judging you, just recording the fact that the doors stayed closed until the right name arrived. There's a dry humor in that, if you let it be gentle. Imagine a divine falcon mask as the world's oldest staff member, bored but diligent, watching the corridor and thinking, yes, I have seen this boat before. Please don't touch anything. And Sokar himself, mumma form, is not a jump scare. He's a still point, a reminder that not every sacred presence needs to sparkle. In some depictions, he wears the Etif crown or stands connected to the idea of the necropolis, the beautiful west where the sun sets and the dead are kept. He belongs to that side of the day where everything gets quieter, where labor ends, where you put tools down and wipe your hands. In a way, the noon detour into Sokar's cavern feels like a tiny rehearsal of sunset, inserted into the brightest part of the day like a secret nap, which is honestly very relatable. The sun god takes a hidden nap route at noon. Ancient theology occasionally feels like self-care, written hieroglyphs. Direction is something you touch. So what does the crew touch? They touch the rail, they touch the rope, they touch the concept of next. They don't stare ahead, because staring ahead invites impatience. They listen for the way the corridor responds. They notice the sand's heaviness. They measure the space not with eyes, but with habit. There's a kind of tenderness in that. The universe becomes kinder when it becomes smaller, when it becomes a series of reachable surfaces. And if you're looking for one more tiny, mildly strange fact to keep your mind gently engaged, Egyptian texts sometimes treat the underworld as a place where things are named into usefulness. A door becomes a door because it has a name, and because someone knows the right way to address it. A region becomes navigable because it has titles and gatekeepers and instructions. That SY Underworld books list so many beings, not because the Egyptians were trying to overwhelm you, but because listing is control and control is calm. It is like labeling your cables so you don't have to guess which one charges your phone at 2 in the morning. The myth is, in part, an ancient cable management system for the soul. So while the world above remains bright and busy, the boat deepens into this quiet geography, and the hush becomes more specific. You can almost feel the rib-like passages bending, the mountain of impenetrable pressing above like a heavy blanket of stone. The name is so blunt it becomes soothing again. Impenetrable means you can stop trying. You don't have to force your way through. You just follow the allowed corridor. You accept the limits, and that acceptance is the magical part, really. Not spectacle, not fireworks, just a calm yes to what is possible. Your mind might want to ask, what is the point of a cavern at noon? A hidden detour, a corridor of black sand. But the myth doesn't answer in a tidy conclusion because it isn't trying to close the file. It's trying to keep the sun steady. It's trying to keep the world from wobbling when brightness becomes too obvious. Even light needs a seam, a hinge, a place to go inward and be repaired. That's the soft curiosity at the heart of it, that the most visible thing in the sky also has private corridors, quiet workshops, and a god of stillness waiting in a black sanded hall. And as the bark moves on, as voices stay small, and torches continue being embarrassingly loud in a room that didn't ask for them, you can let your attention shrink too, down to the feeling of the rope of time sliding, down to the heaviness of sand, down to the simple idea that direction can be touched, not seen. If a thought rises, you can label it once, like a scribe labeling a jar, and set it back on its shelf. The cavern will hold it for you. The corridor will keep going. The hush will remain perfectly uninterested in hurry. And the boat will keep drifting through Sokar's geography of silence, deeper into the kind of quiet that doesn't end, only folds into the next careful step. While the boat keeps its slow, careful line through Sokar's hush, something else is happening above you, in a temple that still looks perfectly ordinary in the moonlight. That is the gentle trick of this detour. From the outside, a person might just see heat shimmering over stone, a courtyard bleached pale, maybe a few palm shadows lying down like tired animals. And yet, inside, the day is being managed with the kind of calm precision usually reserved for pouring tea without spilling or closing a drawer so softly it doesn't argue back. Up there, clerks and priests watch Eclipse Hydra, the water clock, and they do it the way you might watch a sleeping pet. Not because it is exciting, but because you don't want to miss the small movement that tells you everything is still alive. The clepsydra is patient, it doesn't rush. Water goes where it goes, drop after drop, like a soft insistence. There are markings, of course quiet little lines that turn dripping into time. And if you think that sounds like a lot of responsibility for a pot of water, you're right. But Egypt loved turning everyday objects into cosmic instruments. A bowl can become a sky. A feather can become a verdict. A jar can become tomorrow, as long as you label it neatly. At noon, the shadow is measured against something surprisingly humble, like a bronze nail, as if the whole sun were being asked to check in at the front desk. The nail doesn't move. It doesn't shine dramatically. It just exists, doing its small job with no applause. I like that detail. A universe that relies on a nail is a universe that understands you can only handle so much grandeur before you need a simple object to stare at. The sun is loud by nature. The sun is all presence. So the ritual answers it with something quiet, a point on the floor, a line on a vessel, a clerk with a reed brush who has probably written the same note every day and is in a deeply spiritual way slightly bored. And that boredom is almost sacred. Not the restless kind, not the kind that makes you want to shake your phone and refresh your feed. The slow, smooth boredom that comes from doing a small thing well, repeatedly, until it becomes a groove your mind can rest in. The clerk hears the drips and counts without hurrying them. He doesn't lean in and demand faster drops. He lets water be water. There's a lesson in that you don't have to announce. Your eyelids can learn it without words. Somewhere in the same space, names of caverns are recited, not shouted, never shouted. Recited the way you might read labels on spice jars before cooking, just to remind your hands what they're about to do. Every title is a tool, not a boast. That line is a soft little antidote to modern noise. In these rites, people don't say names to look impressive. They say names because names are keys. They oil hinges. They keep doors from squeaking. They keep the world from sticking. It is easy to imagine the underworld as a series of dramatic obstacles, but the Egyptian version, when it wants to be kind, is more like a long corridor of procedures. You greet what must be greeted. You avoid what must be avoided. You say the correct phrase once without improvisation. You do not freestyle at the gates of eternity. You do what the wall texts say, the way you might follow calm instructions on a piece of furniture assembly, except this time the furniture is the sun's schedule. And yes, that is a funny thought if you let it be. The solar bark arriving with an invisible instruction manual and a priest somewhere murmuring, No, the proud piece goes in first, while the universe politely pretends not to notice. The incense is refreshed exactly once. That specificity is comforting. Exactly once means you don't have to wonder if you were forgetting something and should keep checking. Exactly once means it is measured, controlled, and therefore sleepy. Kifi, the famous temple incense, is one of those substances that feels like it was invented by a person who wanted the room to smell like a good decision. Ingredients shift depending on time and place, but the idea stays. Resins, honey, maybe wine, fragrant woods, the kind of blend that makes you think of storerooms and careful hands. When it's refreshed, the brazier hisses the same note each day. Not a new sound for a new dawn, not artistic variation, the same note. Like a kettle you know well, like a door you can close in the dark without bumping your shoulder. If you re-still awake, only if you re-still awake, you can do the modern version of that calm repetition and subscribe. Or don't. Let the thought drift along like a lazy reed boat and bump gently into the bank. Either way, the sun will keep its quiet timetable, and the water will keep dripping. The universe, thankfully, does not check your engagement metrics. On the roof, mirrors are covered. That detail always feels like a whispered kindness. Mirrors are strange objects even now. They show you too much at once. They invite your mind to sharpen. They encourage fussing. So in this noon detour, when the god changes corridors, mirrors are kept asleep under cloth. No calling out, no peeking. It's not secrecy like a conspiracy. It's privacy like a closed curtain. The sun is doing maintenance. Let it do maintenance. And if you imagine those covered mirrors, try to picture how the cloth hangs. Soft, heavy, undramatic. Maybe it's linen because linen is Egypt's favorite calm fabric. Always clean, always folded, always ready to behave. Linen can wrap the dead. Linen can dress the living. Linen can hush a mirror. It does everything without making a speech. It is, in its own way, a priestly material. Down below, while all this behaves itself above, the boat keeps moving through Sokar's region. You can feel the connection between the drip in the clepsydra and the slow, careful forwardness of the bark. It's like two metronomes agreeing to be gentle. One is water on stone, one is wood through hush. Neither is dramatic. Both are essential. And the more you think about it, the more it makes sense that Egypt would tie cosmic survival to quiet counting. When your world depends on a river, you learn to respect steady things. There are other little timekeepers in Egyptian thought. Tudican stars, for example, rising and shifting through the night in neat groups, like a celestial schedule posted where anyone patient enough can read it. Priests could track hours by watching which stars appeared, as if the sky were a slow wheel turning labels past a pointer. In the daytime, when stars are shy, the water clock steps in like a helpful assistant. The cosmos is never allowed to be unsupervised, not because it is naughty, but because supervision is comfort. Someone is always taking attendance. If your mind wants to wander into a tiny microhook, consider how deeply the Egyptians trusted lists. They listed spells, they listed names of gates, they listed offerings. They listed the parts of a person's soul like you might list items in a bag before traveling. Heart, shadow, name, spirit, all accounted for. A list is a promise that nothing will be forgotten. And for a culture that cared so much about staying intact, physically, socially, cosmically, that promise mattered. Even Sokar's silence becomes manageable when it has a title and a place on a wall. So the recitation continues. Soft names, paced by drips, spoken as if oiling hinges. You can imagine the hinge itself dark bronze, worn smooth, a point of friction that could squeak if neglected. Words in this mindset are maintenance, not decoration. Not performance, maintenance. It's a surprisingly modern idea, actually, hidden in ancient ritual clothing. The world runs better when you do small upkeep regularly, rather than waiting for a crisis and then panicking. Even the sun prefers preventative care. And with that in mind, the detour becomes less eerie and more domestic in a mythic way. A hidden corridor at noon isn't a horror scene. It's the universe stepping into a back room to fix a loose thread. Brightness thins like a curtain with a seam, and the seam needs stitching. The boat is the needle. The words are the thread. The drips are the counting that keeps your hand steady. There's a quiet absurdity in imagining a god as something that can be repaired, but Egyptian theology often treats gods as powers that still follow processes. Ro travels. Ra ages and renews. Ra can be protected by spells. Ra can be helped by other beings. The sun is mighty, yes, but it's also a working thing. Not a static symbol hanging in the sky like a decorative lamp. It has shifts, it has roots, it has a crew. It has, at noon, a moment where it goes somewhere private and lets the world keep shining above as if nothing happened. The clerks note the hour, the ink dries. Another reed brush is dipped. The scribal palette sits nearby two little wells for pigment. Black and red, the classic colors of Egyptian order. Black for the normal flow. Red for emphasis, warnings, headings, or simply moments that need to stand up straighter. Even that is sleepy in its own way. Black for most of life. Red for the parts that nip at your attention. In the clepsydra's room, you could almost imagine a note written in calm black, with a tiny red mark for noon's hinge, like a polite reminder. Outside, the animals pause in shade. You might not notice it unless you read the kind of person who notices how pigeons turn their heads, or how a dog sighs before settling down. But in the story's logic, the noon detour leaves faint signs on Earth. Fly slow. A well's echo changes key by half a tone. A cup of water tastes briefly metallic, then normal again. These are not omens that demand action. They're just the world blinking. A small reset, like when your computer fan changes its hum for a second and then goes back to pretending it wasn't doing anything important. Astronomers notice a hush in the glare thinner gold that thickens again without moving. Merchants call it the short hour. Farmers call it the held breath. Scribes just mark a dot, which is the most scribal response imaginable. When in doubt, make a mark. When life is strange, label it. Meaning can come later. Or not at all. The dot still helps. If you like, you can borrow their calm and mark your own mind the same way. Not with a dramatic insight, just a dot. A small acknowledgement that time is doing something and you don't have to chase it. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Let the rope slide through the ring. Let the corridor exist whether you see it or not. And now, because we're drifting toward the practical little oath that closes this part of the map, imagine someone at the temple stairs speaking softly to a pilgrim who looks a bit squinty from sun and life. The advice is not heroic. It doesn't ask for grand transformation. It asks for jars. Keep facts in one jar: Sokar's cavern, Noon's hinge, the crew's 3 tasks. Keep awe in another, small, labeled, steady. This is such a gentle way to organize a mind. Facts are for the part of you that likes structure. Awe is for the part of you that goes quiet when it sees something too big. Don't mix them until you have to. If you put awe into the facts jar, you get overwhelmed. If you put facts into the awe jar, you start lecturing when you meant to feel. 2 jars, 2 lids, no spilling. When brightness feels cruel, assume a corridor exists. I love that line because it is both mystical and extremely practical. It doesn't say, when life is hard, everything is secretly fine. It says, when it feels too bright, there might be a shaded route you can't see yet. Reduce your stride. Count to 12. 12 is a good number in Egypt. 12 hours, 12 gates, 12 neat divisions that keep infinity from feeling rude. Counting to 12 is like walking your thoughts down a stair, one step at a time, until you reach a flatter, quieter place. Let repairs be routine, not spectacle. Tighten rope, repaint edge, speak the short names. That's the whole epic in one breath. Tighten rope first. Don't compose a poem about rope. Repaint the edge before it peels. Speak the short names, not the long worries. If you need to change something, change one small thing. The myth is generous that way. It doesn't demand a new identity each day. It suggests maintenance. And when the disc grows full again, drink, unclasp the mirrors, and return to ordinary light. Not return triumphant, not return transformed, just return. Drink water, uncover the mirror. Let the room be a room again. Let noon be noon. The most sacred thing, sometimes, is how smoothly life resumes after the universe does its quiet hidden turn. So the detour completes itself without fanfare. The clepsydra keeps dripping because water does not need applause. The brazier sighs its familiar note and then quiets, because even incense knows when to stop talking. Cloth hangs over mirrors like a gentle eyelid. Somewhere in a corridor you cannot see, the bard continues to move, and the crew continues to use perception and speech the way a careful person uses hands slowly, precisely with no wasted motion. If your mind wants a final micro hook to hold lightly before it drifts, imagine the scribes, the ones who painted those underworld maps, as people who believed that writing something down could keep it from vanishing. They wrote paths into walls. They wrote names into permanence. They drew the boat and the caverns as if the universe could be helped by a good diagram. It's absurd in the sweetest way, like leaving yourself a note on the fridge that says, remember, breathe. You already know, but the note helps anyway. And now you can let the note blur. You can let the dot on the papyrus become just a dot. You can let the counted drops turn into uncounted drops. The corridor is there whether you track it or not. The jars are there whether you label them perfectly or not. The sun will keep finding its hidden seam at noon, and the world will keep shining above. While below quietly, patiently, Ra continues along that soft, secret route, drifting onward as if the story could keep going, and going, and going, without ever needing to stop at the end. Noon in the story is not a bright triangle of certainty pinned to the sky. It is a hinge. It is the moment when the sun looks most confident and yet quietly steps aside for a task that must be done without an audience. If you listen closely enough that listening starts to feel like resting, you can almost hear the heat itself making room, like a crowded room shifting so someone can pass through with a tray of cups. The world above keeps shining, politely unaware. The world below stays cool and exact. And on the boat, the work becomes very simple, very practiced, almost tender in its repetition, because Apep does not only belong to midnight and deep darkness, not in the way people like to imagine. Apep is not a creature that waits only for black skies and dramatic storm music. In the Egyptian mind, he can swell in heat too, in glare, and that sharp, dry brilliance that makes everything feel a little too exposed. Noon is when fangs remember rotes to throats, the text suggests, and it's such a strange phrase that it nearly makes you smile, even as you try to keep your face soft, your shoulders loose, your breathing slow. Imagine the concept of fangs having a memory, like teeth with a calendar reminder. Imagine the sun's crew taking that seriously, like a maintenance note. At high day, check the teeth situation. Keep it quiet. Do it properly. So the binding work begins, and it does not feel like a battle. It feels like careful clerical labor performed with the whole body. The crew does not shout. They do not sprint. They do not do anything that would disturb the smooth interior of the moment. A binding is not a spectacle. It's a procedure. You can picture Xiao perception holding attention the way you might hold the lantern, not to make things dramatic, but just to see where the floor is. You can picture Hu authoritative speech standing by with phrases that have been used so many times they have worn soft grooves in the air. And you can picture Mahan, the serpent who coils as protection, not rearing like a monster, but lying like a living rail along the deck, a boundary you can trust not to move. Inhale 4, exhale 6. The boat likes a rhythm. The underworld likes a rhythm. Even the heat above is rhythmic when you stop judging it and simply let it be present. The binding work borrows that steady pace. No hurry, no drift. The sun has stepped into a corridor where time behaves and the crew behaves with it, as if they are all agreeing quietly that the universe runs better when everyone is a little less dramatic. The knives come out. But even that feels smaller than the word knife wants to be. In this telling, knives are words first. They are clipped clauses. They are short sentences pulled tight in the mouth, the way you might pull a knot snug, so it won't slip while you sleep. The spells are not long, flowery speeches. The spells are practical. They are like labels. They are like cautions written in margin. They are language reduced to its most useful shape, because this is not the time for poetry with extra syllables wandering around unsupervised. There is a strange comfort in that. It's like discovering that the cosmic solution to a cosmic problem is good phrasing, not louder phrasing, not clever phrasing, just correct phrasing, repeated calmly. If you've ever rewritten a message to make it less complicated and more honest, then you understand the mood. The crew is editing reality gently, with the kind of care that suggests they've done it before, and they'll do it again, and nobody will clap. And that's fine. They tie bindings with breath and counting. That detail is so sleepy, it almost feels like a blessing. Imagine a cord being looped, not only around an idea of a serpent, but around the mind's tendency to dart. Each loop is one count. Each count is an exhale. The cord doesn't tighten with anger. It tightens with measured attention. You don't win against chaos by flailing. You win against chaos by refusing to give it your tempo. Sometimes for a moment, your modern brain wants to interrupt and ask, isn't this all a bit much for noon? And then the ritual answers softly. Noon is exactly when you do the quiet maintenance, because everyone is awake enough to do it carefully. and sleepy enough in the heat to do it without fuss. The Egyptians were practical even when they were mystical, especially when they were mystical. The sun's boat has a schedule, and schedules always include inconvenient little tasks at inconvenient little times, like cleaning the filter, updating the forms, checking the rope's dot. You can almost picture a neat little kit for this work. Not a dramatic armory, but a set of objects that have been handled so often they feel familiar in the hand. A coil of cord, a board or strip of material where names can be written, a small dish with pigment, perhaps a little figurine shaped like the problem, because in many rituals, you represent what you want to bind, and then you bind the representation, as if reality is more cooperative when it can see what you mean. It's a very human impulse. When you can't control the big thing, you make a small version and tidy that. It feels like organizing your desk when your life is messy. Not a complete solution, but still soothing dot. And then there are nets. Nets of flame, the text suggests, thrown and tightened, not with triumph, but with names. The image is oddly domestic if you tilt it gently. Net making is patient work. Net making is loops upon loops. Net making is something you can do while talking quietly, while listening to someone else talk quietly, while the day moves on outside as if you're just sitting in the shade. The fact that the underworld uses nets as a cosmic tool is reassuring, because nets are not aggressive objects. Nets are structured boundaries. Nets are a soft way to say, not today. The flame part, if it threatens to wake you, can be imagined as symbolic heat contained, heat shaped, heat turned into something that behaves. Like the brazier above that hisses the same note each day. Like Kiffy rising and curling without rushing. Flames can be loud in the world, yes, but in ritual they can be polite. They can be small. They can be trained into patterns. They can be heat with manners. The crew speaks the names that own the mesh. That phrase is another little micro-hook, strange, specific, and oddly satisfying. Names that own the mesh, not hands, not muscles. Names, in Egypt, names were not just identifiers. They were pieces of a thing's reality. A true name could be leverage. A name could be protection. A name could be a lock. So when they say the right names, the net tightens because the universe recognizes authority. It's like having the correct password, but said aloud and treated with respect. Not typed in a hurry while annoyed at the login screen dot, and of course, who is there for that? Authoritative speech is this whole field. If Sael is the lantern, who is the key phrase spoken clearly? And perhaps this is where your modern analogy can drift in, very gently. The entire solar system, for one soft moment, operates like a system that accepts only properly formatted input. No extra punctuation, no unnecessary emotion. Just the phrase, said with steady breath, and the door behaves. Making coils and uncoils as needed, not to be theatrical, but because coiling is what he does. The serpent's job is to be a boundary, a living perimeter. A calm reminder that some things are allowed close and some aren't. It's the same principle as the covered. Mirrors at noon. Limits are not cruelty. Limits are care. Limits are how you let something sacred do its work without being interrupted. Even the sun, at its most public hour, needs privacy. If you let your mind drift to the deck itself, the wood, the rope, the small sounds that happen. When people move carefully, you can feel how nonviolent this work can be in a sleepy telling. A hand adjusts a chord. A voice recites a short line, clipped and clean. A coil shifts by an inch, like a cat turning in its sleep. The air is still. The underworld sand is heavy and black in the imagination, but the boat is steady, and steadiness is more powerful than drama when you're trying to fall asleep. There may be a moment when someone makes a small mistake, not a catastrophic mistake, just a human one. A phrase spoken with the wrong emphasis, a knot pulled too quickly. a cord that slips and has to be redone. And the response, ideally, is not panic. The response is a quiet correction. Egyptian ritual, when it is at its best, feels like a culture that understands you can fix things without making a show of your anxiety. You simply redo the knot. You speak the line again, slightly slower. You return to breath on 4 and 6. You treat the universe like a task that deserves patience, not like a fragile object that will explode if you blink. That's another sleepy lesson, hidden inside the myth. If fear wakes, rewrite it shorter and speak it once. Don't keep repeating the fear until it grows stronger from attention. Speak it once, then let the water count the rest. The crew does something similar with the threats that swell at noon. They do not feed it with fascination. They do not circle it and narrate it dramatically. They bind it, they name it, they tighten the mesh. They move on quietly, as if the most respectful thing you can do with chaos is to not give it extra airtime, APEP. In this moment becomes less like a monster and more like a recurring problem, like mold, like rust, like an old bad habit that returns when conditions are right. Heat makes it swell, brightness makes it bold. So you treat it like maintenance. You don't hate rust, you remove rust. You repaint the edge, you keep the tool clean. This is not an epic emotion. This is competence dot, and competence is very soothing. There's a small humor in imagining the sun god's crew as a team of extremely calm specialists. Ciel with his lantern of perception, like someone who always notices when a picture frame is slightly crooked. Who with his precise phrasing, like someone who rereads a contract twice and actually enjoys it. Mayan as the living safety rail, like that one friend who quietly stands between you and your worst impulses without making a speech. And perhaps a small scarab somewhere. Kepra's little symbol of renewal rolling a seed of dawn forward, even while noon is trying to be too loud. It's a funny image in miniature, the scarab patient, already rehearsing a birth it will perform later, as the crew handles the noon problem with the tired professionalism of people who have been on shift for eternity. Asterisk. If you want a micro hook that feels like a soft pebble in the pocket, consider how many Egyptian protective objects were small enough to hold in a palm. An Eye of Horus amulet, smooth and cool. A little Bas figure, squat and unapologetically ugly in the cutest way, meant to ward off nightmares like a grumpy bouncer. Tiny carved names. Miniature boats. The Egyptians did not only think big, they thought small. They trusted that small things could protect big things. They trusted that a small figure could guard a sleep, a childbirth, a journey, a soul. So it makes sense that even the sun, huge as it is, would rely on small, repeated actions at noon, breath, words, knots, names. And maybe, because you are listening in the modern world, where noon is often a time for emails and headaches, you can borrow their method. When something returns to bite in your own mind, an old worry, a familiar regret, a thought that likes to show up exactly when you're tired, you don't have to wrestle it loudly. You can bind it with a short phrase, a small limit, a counted breath. You can throw a net of structure over it. Not now. Tomorrow, small step. You can tighten the mesh with a name. This is anxiety. This is impatience. This is just my brain doing that thing. Names that own the mesh. The thought might still wriggle, but it will wriggle inside a boundary you chose. Back on the boat, the nets are tightened. The bindings hold. Not forever, nothing holds forever in a living cosmos, but for now, for this hour, for this portion of the route. The current loosens without triumph. That detail matters. No victory parade, no cheering, no dramatic exhale. The crew simply notices the pressure ease and then does the most responsible next thing. They repair their attention before their gear. That line is so gentle, it could be a bedtime recommendation. Repair attention before gear. Before you fix the complicated thing, fix the part of you that is doing the fixing. Sit still. Breathe again. Check your posture. Let your hands unclench. Make sure your voice is calm before you use it. The Egyptians understood that a ritual is not only about the outcome, it is about the condition of the people performing it. You can't shape the world well if your own mind is jagged dot, so they do tiny repairs first. A cord rewrapped, a knot checked, a hand placed on the rail. CL studies the lantern of perception and makes sure it doesn't turn into staring too hard. Who files the phrasing for next time, because even divine speech can be refined. Maine shifts his coil and settles again, cool rope made alive, the kind of protection that doesn't brag. If you are still awake enough to imagine sound, imagine it as minimal. The soft rub of cord on wood, a low exhale, a whisper spoken once, the smallest hiss of heated air somewhere far above where the temple brazier does its daily identical note. Everything is neat. Everything is clipped. Everything is low volume dot and in the distance, always in the distance, because we don't need the camera to zoom in and make it exciting. The underworld geography remains what it is. Heavy sand, narrow corridors, silence with a crown. But the boat is moving through it the way a person moves through a hallway at night. One careful step, then another, not trying to wake the house. You can almost feel the pleasure of that carefulness, the pleasure of not bumping into anything, the pleasure of knowing the route is mapped, the pleasure of being guided by procedures that have been done so many times they've become smooth dot if your mind tries to demand a conclusion, if it wants to know. Is Apep gone now? You can let that question fade. Egyptian myth is not always interested in gone. It is interested in managed. The sun rises again because the work is repeated. Order continues because order is maintained. Boundaries hold because boundaries are renewed. The detour at noon exists because the universe accepts that some things need ongoing attention, and that ongoing attention can be calm dot, so the work continues, softly, even after the worst of the pressure eases. They keep the names warm in memory. They keep the knots neat. They keep the net ready, folded like linen, waiting without impatience. They keep breath in its counted groove. Inhale 4, exhale 6, and as the boat slides onward, the idea of binding, of making a simple limit around what returns, starts to feel less like a dramatic myth and more like a quiet craft. You could practice yourself. Half asleep with no tools at all, a craft of short names, of small repairs, of steady hands, and the sun above keeps gleaming in its ordinary way, as if nothing unusual happened. Brightness looks full again. Shadows behave. People walk and complain about heat, having no idea that somewhere in a hidden corridor of the day, clipped clauses were spoken like knives. Nets were tightened with names, and attention was repaired before gear. The world continues not because it won, but because it kept doing the work slowly, softly, properly, until even the idea of danger feels like something already filed, already labeled, already held inside a mesh that knows its own shape. Drifting onward with the boat, with the breath, with the endless. Quiet habit of keeping things just calm enough to last. At noon, when the sun looks most confident, almost smug. If a disc can be smug, there is a tiny private rumor that it sometimes steps off stage. Not in a dramatic way. More like the way you quietly close a laptop when it gets too warm and pretend it was your idea all along. The world above keeps shining. People keep squinting, bread keeps browning. But somewhere beneath that clean brightness, a door has been cut into the light itself, and the solar bark slips into a place where even gold feels a little tired. If you're listening from somewhere comfortable, you can keep your eyes soft. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe, or don't, and let Ra's noon detour handle the decision like a very old bureaucrat who has seen every form twice. Down here, inside the hidden corridor that belongs to Sokar, everything is maintenance. That's the word you wouldn't expect for a god, because we like our gods to be dramatic, thunderous, and slightly overbooked. But Egypt had a quieter way of imagining power as something that gets cared for, brushed, oiled, corrected, and relabeled in neat handwriting. Ra is not only the blazing face over the river, he is also the person, if person can be stretched to fit a sun, who sits still while someone carefully checks the edges where glare has frayed. The crew moves in that calm, professional way that says, yes, this is normal, and no, we're not going to make a production out of it. Ciel carries perception like a lantern that does not flicker, who keeps his voice measured because the wrong syllable can snap on stone and the stone will not apologize. Mehen, the serpent who coils around the deck like living rope, loosens just enough to let hands reach the rails. It isn't fear that makes them careful, it's etiquette. Even in a cavern, even at noon, there are rules about how you touch a god dot. They begin with the combing. Not hair, exactly, though some images do show the sun god with a kind of dignified beard, and the Egyptians did love a good bit of orderly grooming. This is the combing of radiance, the smoothing of what the day has pulled out of shape. A priest's fingers or a god's fingers, or both myth is polite like that. It allows jobs to be shared draw through the invisible strands that hold light together. Spells are spoken like small tools taken from a cloth roll. Not shouted, not performed, just used. Short phrases, clipped clauses, the kind of words that sound like they have been sharpened and put back in their place. If you imagine a salon appointment, it's not the glamorous kind with music. It's the soothing kind where everyone whispers, and you can hear the soft snip of scissors and the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly where the split ends are. Old age, in these stories, is not a tragedy. It's a daily garment. Ra wears it and then he doesn't, and nobody claps either way. At high day, in Sokar's hidden root, the old layers are poured off like hot resin that cools into ropes. Think of wax poured over a seal, how it starts as a glossy urgency and becomes, within minutes, a calm, matte certainty. Ra's tiredness is handled with the same practical tenderness. They don't scold him for it. They don't pretend it isn't there. They simply loosen what has hardened and let it slide away in a controlled, respectful drip. Somewhere in the dark, a bowl waits, not a fancy bowl, not the kind that demands admiration, just a bowl that holds what it is given. If you've ever cleaned a paintbrush in cloudy water and watched color bleed out in slow ribbons, you know the feeling. The day rinses itself. The sun is allowed to be refreshed without anyone making it awkward, and because Egypt is Egypt, none of this happens without names. Names are the real chords. Names are the real knots. You can sail a cosmic river with gold and oars and a serpent wrapped around your gunwale. Sure, but the thing that keeps the boat honest is a line of correct titles spoken in the correct order. So the crew murmurs the names of gates, the names of hours, the names of protective beings who are less famous than the headline gods, but just as necessary, like the small screws in a door hinge that nobody thanks until the door stops closing. They talk to the prow as if it has feelings. They talk to the paint as if it remembers. They talk to the air as if it might get ideas. There is a gentle absurdity to it, the way you might talk to your phone while it updates. Please behave. Please don't do anything strange, and then feel slightly embarrassed when it works. The Egyptians, at least, were not embarrassed. They treated the world as something you can negotiate with softly near the prow. The scarab is doing its own quiet work, not the big, symbolic, museum shop scarab that sits in your palm like a polished promise. This is a living beetle, or a divine version of one, patient and intent, rolling what looks like a seed of dawn between its forelegs. It's not bright yet. It's not a sunrise. It's just the idea of mourning condensed into something small enough to move without strain. The scarab does not hurry. It tests the weight, the texture, the willingness of it. And that is so Egyptian, isn't it? This belief that rebirth is not an explosion, but a routine. The scarab rolls. It pauses. It adjusts. It rolls again. If you've ever tried to carry a sleeping child without waking them, you understand the technique. Tiny corrections, careful balance, a devotion to not making a fuss. They say Khepri is the morning sun, the sun in the shape of a beetle, pushing the day into being. And here, in this noon detour, the scarab is rehearsing, practicing the exact pressure needed for tomorrow. Some days it rolls the seed along the edge of the deck where man's coils make a safe boundary. Some days it rolls it through a shallow tray of sand so black it looks like ink. The sand takes the shape of every touch and then releases it, like memory that doesn't cling. The crew watches in a calm, absent way, the way you might watch a cat slowly decide where to sit. Nobody interrupts. Nobody says, "Hurry up, we have dawn to make." Dawn, apparently, can wait. Or rather, dawn is being made precisely by not rushing it. Meanwhile, the repairs continue. Paint is touched where glare a color. Imagine sunlight as a hungry thing, not malicious, just always nibbling. It nibbles at the bright edges of the boat's decoration, at the lines painted along the side that mark protection and identity. Over time, even divine paint can look tired, like a sign left too long at a window. So hands come with small palettes and the colors are humble. Ochre, blue, green, black. Red, nothing flashy, nothing neon, nothing that would keep you awake. The brushstrokes are slow, and each stroke is paired with a word. As if the color alone isn't enough. As if the paint needs permission to stay. If you've ever rewritten a sentence to make it clearer, you know this feeling too. Not changing the story, just making it sit more comfortably in its own meaning. The prow is washed with a bowl of minutes. That sounds poetic, and it is, but it's also weirdly literal. Up above, in a temple that pretends it has no idea the sun is doing secret detours, a priest watches a water clock. The clepsydra drips at the same calm pace it always does. Drop after drop, like the world practicing patience. Those drops are time, and time is poured into a bowl, and that bowl is carried by ritual, by imagination, by the thin bridge between above and below into the cavern where I is being serviced like a sacred lamp. The prow is washed with those measured minutes so the boat remembers rhythm. So it doesn't start thinking it can do whatever it wants. Boats, like people, need reminders. As the bowl tips, the water slides over wood, over gold, over carved lines. It makes everything briefly darker, then brighter, then calm again. The smell is not strong. It is clean, mineral, faintly metallic, the way water tastes when it has been kept in a copper vessel, or the way a well tastes in a hot month. The crew does not splash. They do not play. They treat the water as if it is a sentence that needs to be read carefully. You can almost hear the drips, and if you let your own breathing match them, inhale. 4. Exhale. 6, you'll be doing exactly what the cavern likes. That slow counting isn't just for you. It's for the whole system. A universe that runs on hours and gates has a soft spot for anyone who counts politely. Sometimes, while the prow is being washed, someone checks the lashings. Not because they think the boat will fall apart, though it's nice that even gods accept. Maintenance has its place, but because attention itself is a kind of rope. They tighten a knot, and the knot tightens the story. They inspect the seams, and the seams behave. This is the kind of mythology that treats care as magic. You don't win by force. You win by doing the small things correctly, again and again, until chaos gets bored and wanders off. It's almost like dealing with a messy room. You don't fight the mess. You pick up one object. You put it where it belongs. The mess loses momentum. Even APEP, that great refusal of order, can be handled this way. Not with a heroic scream, but with properly spoken words and well-tied bindings. Noon is not a battlefield here. It's a workshop dot. There's a quiet moment when Who files the phrasing for next time. Not literally with a metal file, though I wouldn't put it past Egypt to imagine language as something you could sand smooth. He holds phrases in his mouth like little weights, testing how they sit, how they balance. Some words are sharp and should be used sparingly. Some words are soft and can be repeated without harm. Some names are heavy and should not be spoken unless you really mean it, like the way you shouldn't send a message you'll regret. Xiao, beside him, keeps watch for the smallest change in the cavern's mood. A shift in silence, a slight thickening of air, a feeling that the corridor has turned its head. Direction down here is something you touch, not see. The crew rates it with fingertips and breath. They behave like people walking through a dark house at night, trying not to bump into furniture that has been moved. And somewhere above, because the world above never stops being itself, an astronomer squints at the sky and notices something like a hush in the light. Not darkness, not a cloud, just a thinner gold, for a brief stretch, like the sun took a slow breath. A scribe might mark a dot, a merchant might call it the short hour, a farmer might call it the hell breath. A dog might just stop and blink as if an invisible breeze passed through its skull. Nobody panics. Nobody needs to. Egypt liked its mysteries to be tucked neatly into ordinary life, like a small charm sewn into a hem. You go on with your day. The sun goes on with its secret. Back in the cavern, the reignition begins, and it is almost disappointingly gentle. No trumpet, no sudden blaze that would make you sit up. It's more like the moment a lamp steadies after you trim the wick. The pulse returns to the deck in quiet increments. The timbers answer like a drum under cloth, a muted warmth, a reassuring vibration that says, yes, the boat remembers what it is. Mayhin recoils into a comfortable loop again, not tight, not loose, just correct. The scarab pauses its rolling and seems for a second, satisfied in the way only a beetle can be satisfied, not proud, not sentimental, simply done with that task for now. Ra's presence settles into its daytime shape again, the way a blanket settles when you stop fussing with it. If you listen closely, the whole scene feels like routine stitched into eternity. A god gets touched up like paint on a doorframe. Time is ladled like water. Dawn is toasted like a seed between small forelegs. And the universe, instead of roaring, simply keeps its appointments. 12 gates at night, a hidden corridor at noon, and somewhere in the middle, a quiet promise that even immense things can be cared for without drama. You don't have to understand every name. You don't have to memorize every title. You can let the words drift past you like reeds along a slow river. All soft edges and repeating patterns dot, so the boat sits for a moment longer in Sokar's hush, as if enjoying the shade. The repairs are checked once more, not because anyone doubts them, but because checking is part of the spell. A final line is spoken short, deliberate, pulled tight in the mouth, and then the corridor that was a door begins to behave like a seam again. Light, freshly combed, takes its place without showing the stitches. Above, the sun looks whole. Below, the tools are put away in their cloth roll. The bowl is emptied, the brush is rinsed. The seed of dawn waits patiently for its next small. Steady push, and if your thoughts wander, that's perfectly fine. Bring them back the way the crew brings the bark back, slowly, politely, without scolding. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Imagine the sound of water counting minutes into a bowl. Imagine paint being touched where glare at color. Imagine a scarab rehearsing tomorrow with the seriousness of someone packing a lunch. The timbers keep their muffled rhythm. The corridor keeps its silence. The world above keeps shining, unaware in the most peaceful way, and the sun, freshly repaired, continues unhurried, unannounced along its endless, gentle route. There's a particular kind of quiet that only happens when something important takes a tiny step sideways and refuses to announce it. Not a storm, not an eclipse, just a thin pause in the brightness, like the day briefly misplaces its confidence and then remembers where it left it. If you've ever walked into a room and forgotten why you came in, and then stood there politely until your brain returned with the information, it's a little like that. The sun is still there, of course. It would be rude to fully leave, but for a short, secret stretch, it behaves as if it is listening to something below the ground, and the world above responds with small, believable signs, nothing theatrical. Just the kind of details you might only notice if you're already calm enough to notice anything at all. The first sign is usually an animal doing what animals do best, pausing for no clear reason, and making it look deliberate. A goat on a low ridge stops chewing as if the act suddenly requires paperwork. A dog in the shade lifts its head, blinks twice, and decides that whatever it was about to bark at can wait until later. Birds adjust on their feet and hold still, not frightened, just briefly. Attentive. In the villages and along the fields, someone might say, "Look at that." Even the donkeys are being philosophical today. And a donkey, to be fair, will accept this compliment without changing expression. Animals don't need the story. They simply register the shift the way skin registers a breeze. It feels as if an invisible wind has passed through their skulls, tiding the inside for a moment, then moving on. If you're near water, you might notice the taste change before you notice the light. A sip from a jar, a dip of the hand, and there's a brief metallic note like the memory of copper. Not unpleasant, just unexpected, like your spoon touching your teeth. People who spend their lives around the Nile know water has mood sweetness after a good flood, dustiness when the wind has been busy, a cool hardness in certain wells. So a brief metallic taste doesn't cause alarm, it causes a comment. Someone says softly, "The well is singing in a different key today." Someone else shrugs and says, "Then let it sing, we still need to drink." And the day continues in this very Egyptian way, where mystery is allowed to exist without needing to be chased through the streets. Flies, too, have opinions about the noon detour. You wouldn't think tiny insects would be included in cosmic scheduling, but life around the river includes everything, and the Egyptians did not separate the great from the small as sharply as we like to. For a short hour, flies seem slower, as if their wings are being asked to file a request before buzzing. They still land on bread. They still hover near fruit. But their urgency drops a notch, like someone lowering the volume on a noisy radio. It's the kind of change that makes you think, maybe the air is thicker, or maybe I'm just tired. And honestly, both explanations are acceptable. In a world where the sun might quietly step into Sokar's corridors at noon, maybe the air is behaving differently is not the strangest thought you could have. Asterisk merchants, of course. Do not call it a secret corridor of Sokar. Merchants call it the short hour, which is practical and slightly annoyed. As if time has taken a shortcut and inconvenienced their calculations. They glance at shadows and feel mildly cheated, as if the day briefly refused to give them their full purchase. A merchant might mutter, "The sun has a personal errand again," the same way someone might mutter about a colleague stepping out for an unannounced break. And then the merchant continues weighing grain, because grain does not wait for theology. If you're trying to imagine ancient Egypt as only statues and solemn chanting, it helps to remember it was also people complaining about timing and profit. Very softly, in the shade, there are also echoes, small ones. Harmless ones, the kind you notice near a well or along a stone wall. A bucket goes down, the rope creaks, the water answers, and the echo that comes back has shifted by half a tone, as if the stone has briefly tuned itself to another instrument. You can hear it most clearly if you're alone and not trying too hard. A child might notice and ask why the well sounds like it's in a different mood. An adult might say, because the world is old and old things change their minds sometimes. That's the sort of answer that is both true and completely unhelpful, which is an underrated style of wisdom. And if you're listening to this while trying to fall asleep, unhelpful wisdom is sometimes the most soothing kind, because it asks nothing of you. On the rooftops and the temple edges, where people who like counting things tend to gather, the astronomers notice the light itself seems slightly thinner, not darker, not dim, just gentler, as if the gold has been strained through cloth. They look at their simple instruments, at sighting lines, at marks on stone, and they see the sun still behaving like the sun. It rises, it sits high, it glows with the same steady insistence, and yet, for a short while, the glare feels quieter, a little more contained. The astronomer writes a note in a careful hand, because that is what you do when you sense a secret and want to treat it politely. No one expects the note to change the sky. The note is just a way of saying, I saw you. You can keep your secret. I'm simply recording the fact that the secret happened. Merchants, of course, do not call it a secret corridor of Sokar. Merchants call it the short hour, which is practical and slightly annoyed, as if time has taken a shortcut and inconvenienced their calculations. They glance at shadows and feel mildly cheated, as if the day briefly refused to give them their full purchase. A merchant might mutter, the sun has a personal errand again, the same way someone might mutter about a colleague stepping out for an unannounced break. And then the merchant continues weighing grain, because grain does not wait for theology. If you're trying to imagine ancient Egypt as only statues and solemn chanting, it helps to remember it was also people complaining about timing and profit. Very softly, in the shade, farmers tend to be kinder about it. They call it the held breath. They feel it in the way the heat changes texture, in the way the leaves stop shimmering for a moment, in the way their own shoulders loosen without permission. A held breath is not a loss. It's a pause that gives you back a small amount of yourself. The farmer doesn't need to know about Ra and Sokar to enjoy the difference. They simply lift their head, wipe their brow, and feel that the day is briefly less sharp around the edges. For a moment, even the sun seems to agree that relentless effort is not the only way to be powerful. Sometimes power is the ability to pause. Scribes, being scribes, handle it with the most Egyptian response imaginable. They mark a dot. Not a poem, not a hymn, just a dot, a small ink decision that says, something happened here. If you've ever kept a diary and written, felt strange today, and then moved on, you understand the dot. The dot is not meant to solve anything. It is meant to place the moment on a timeline so it doesn't disappear completely. The Egyptians loved preserving things, names, offerings, stories, the positions of stars, the shape of a good loaf. Preserving a brief hush in the glare with a dot is entirely on brand. And now, very softly, the story behind the signs drifts into your mind the way a slow river drifts around reeds. Because beneath that thin hush, the sun god is doing something almost ordinary by Egyptian standards. He's taking a detour for maintenance, not because he is weak, but because the cosmos in this imagination is a thing that must be cared for. At noon, when the light is at its fullest, it's also at its most strained, like fabric pulled tight. A seam inside the brightness opens, and the solar bark slides into hidden corridors that belong to Sokar, the quiet lord of a subterranean stillness. Above, the world shines as usual. Below, the work is careful and unhurried, the way good work always is. That's why the signs are so small. There is no clash, no drama, just a brief redistribution of attention. Think of it like a household where someone steps into the back room to fix a hinge while the front room remains tidy. You don't see the hinge being fixed. You simply notice that, for a moment, the house sounds different. The echoes behave differently. The air holds itself differently. And if you're sensitive to it, you feel calmer without knowing why, which is one of the kinder tricks mythology can play. The animals sense the shift, because animals are essentially made of sensing. Their ears catch a quieter note in the day. Their bodies register the air's brief thickness. The well tastes metallic because time is being measured and poured somewhere else. Temple water clocks, clepsydras, dripping their minutes, and those minutes being gathered, offered, used. The flies slow because the world's urgency thins for a moment, as if even annoyance takes a short nap. Echoes change because the corridors beneath, the hidden ribs under impenetrable mountains, are adjusting like an instrument being tuned. Nothing breaks. Nothing fights. The universe simply corrects itself the way a careful person adjusts a lamp wick. There is a gentle humor in the idea that the sun, the most visible thing, has a secret. It's almost like learning that the loudest person in a room has a quiet hobby they don't mention. Ra, blazing in public, also has this private corridor where he can be combed with spells, where old age can be poured off like resin cooling into ropes, where paint can be touched up or glarate color. If that image amuses you, let it amuse you softly. The Egyptians often held both reverence and practicality at once, like holding bread in one hand and a prayer in the other. It's a soothing mix. It doesn't demand that you choose. And if you happen to be awake, listening, you can treat these signs the same way the scribes do. Notice them, then let them pass. You don't have to solve anything tonight or today, depending on where you are and what time you're listening from. You can simply accept that the world contains little pauses, little held breaths, little short hours that are not mistakes, just secret turns in the schedule. If you want to, you can even imagine your own thoughts doing the same, stepping briefly off stage for maintenance, returning smoother, less frayed at the edges, asterisk. So the glare above continues, but a fraction quieter. The rooftop astronomer blinks and writes another careful note. The merchant adjusts his tally and complains gently to no one. The farmer feels the held breath and lets it help. The scribe marks the dot, satisfied. A dog in the shade blinks as if something invisible passed through its skull and cleaned a window from the inside. The well echoes with a slightly different tone, then returns to its usual voice. The flies resume their normal, irritating enthusiasm. The metallic taste fades like a thought you can't quite hold on to. And beneath it all, in corridors you don't need to picture too sharply, the sun god finishes his small, quiet errand. The seam in the brightness closes without showing stitches. The day, freshly tended, stretches on smooth, warm, ordinary, and just mysterious enough to be interesting without being loud about it. If your mind drifts, let it drift. If it returns, let it return. Inhale, 4, exhale, 6. And let the sun keep its secret, the way the earth has always kept secrets, patiently under your feet. You might not expect an oath to be taken at noon, when everything is loud with light and the shadows are at their thinnest, but that is exactly why a noon oath is useful. It is easy to be solemn at midnight, when the world is already whispering. It is harder to be gentle when the sun is staring directly at every surface like an inspector with a clipboard. So the oath is not a grand promise, not a dramatic vow that shakes pillars. It is more like a small, sleepy note tied around the wrist, a reminder that even the brightest hour can be handled in a quiet way, with careful hands and a sense of routine. In the stories where Rie slips into Sokar's cavern at the height of day, what comes after is not a celebration, not a parade. What comes after is maintenance, the kind of boring, sacred maintenance that keeps the world from fraying. Imagine someone in a temple storeroom with 2 jars. Not magical jars, not glowing vessels. Just ordinary containers made of clay or stone, the sort that hold grain or beer or oil, and sometimes hold something stranger, like a rule for living. One jar is for facts. The other jar is for fear. The fact jar is labeled in neat ink because scribes cannot help themselves and because labeling is a kind of love. The fear jar is also labeled because in Egypt, even fear is expected to behave and take its assigned place. And the noon oath is simple enough to fit on a small tag. Keep facts in one jar, keep awe in another, and don't mix them unless you truly have to. There's a humor in the idea that the universe can be managed like pantry organization, but it is also comforting. Ancient Egypt was full of big cosmic ideas, and also full of very practical people who knew that if you don't label things, you spend the whole afternoon opening jars and being disappointed. So the facts go into the first jar, steady and specific. Sokar's cavern exists, somewhere beneath the idea of the world, like a corridor under a house you can't see from the street. Noon has a hinge inside it, a seam in brightness that can open without tearing the fabric of daylight. There is a crew that knows how to move through this seam without making a mess. Ciel carries perception like a lantern that doesn't flicker. Who speaks the passwords like someone reading aloud from a list that has been tested 1,000 times. Mehan coils around the hall like living caution tape, except polite and probably less annoying. A scarab is involved because Egypt cannot resist the symbolism of a beetle doing steady work. And if you like, you can add one more fact, the kind that sounds small but is satisfying. Temple time can be measured by water, dripping through a clepsydra, and sometimes time is not only measured but offered, like a careful portion placed on a tray. The fear, meanwhile, is poured into the second jar and closed with a soft lid. Not because fear is shameful, but because fear tends to wander. Fear, when left loose, will walk around your mind and rearrange furniture while you're not looking. It will pick up every thought and say, "Are you sure this is safe?" Like a nervous guest. The noon oath doesn't argue with fear. It simply puts fear somewhere it can sit quietly. If brightness feels cruel, that is a feeling, and feelings do not need to be punished. But the oath says, assume a corridor exists. Assume there is a hidden turn. Assume, even when the sun feels like it is pressing down, that the world has a way to soften itself, just out of sight. This is not denial. This is choosing a gentler interpretation, the way you choose to sit in shade instead of insisting you must stand in the harshest spot to prove something to no one. And because Egyptians loved counting days, counting kings, counting offerings, counting the stars called decans that rise in their neat sequence, the oath includes counting as a kind of spell that doesn't need drama. Reduce your stride and count to 12. Not because 12 is the only number that matters, but because 12 is a number the Egyptians treated with devotion when it came to hours, gates, and orderly transitions. Counting to 12 is like telling your thoughts, we will move through this moment in measured steps. It is also like giving your body a simple task so it stops inventing complicated ones. If you're listening to this and you want to try it, you can do it without ceremony. 1, 2, 3. And let the numbers be pebbles under your feet. No hurry. The sun is not going anywhere. Even when it takes a detour, it does it politely. Somewhere on a rooftop, perhaps, a clerk watches the clepsydra and feels relieved that water is predictable. Drop by drop, time behaves like a well-trained animal. The clerk has seen noon shadows measured against a bronze nail, and has seen incense refreshed exactly once, because repetition has power when it is calm and consistent. The clerk might have a little list of things to check. The brazier hisses at the same note each day. The mirrors on the roof remain covered, and no one calls out while the god changes corridors. That last one is my favorite because it suggests that sometimes the most sacred act is simply not interrupting. Not everything requires commentary. Even the sun deserves privacy during a wardrobe change. And then there are the repairs. Repairs are such an oddly soothing theme in Egyptian myth because we tend to imagine religion as all thunder and judgment, while Egypt often feels like a workshop that never closes. The boat is washed with words, paint is touched where glare ate color. The prow is rinsed with a bowl of minutes, and the crew repairs their attention before they repair their gear. That detail alone is quietly brilliant because anyone who has tried to fix something while irritated knows you are more likely to break it again. So they fix their attention first, as if focus itself is a tool that must be sharpened. This is the kind of mythological detail that feels like advice, which is rude of mythology because you came here to sleep, not to be improved. But don't worry. You can place the advice in the fact jar and close the lid gently. If you think about the sun being combed with spells, it becomes almost domestic. You can picture a god with a crown or a disc, sitting patiently while someone runs a careful comb through light, smoothing tangles, realigning strands. Old age is poured off like hot resin and cools in ropes, which is both strange and oddly satisfying, like watching wax settle. And then there's the moment when pulse returns to the deck, and the boat's timbers answer like a drum under cloth. Not a loud drum, a muted one. The kind of gentle thump that tells you something solid is still there, still functioning, still held together by routine. It's the cosmic equivalent of tapping a table to make sure it doesn't wobble. Out in the ordinary world, the signs of the detour have already been noticed, named, and then set aside. Animals paused, water tasted briefly metallic. Flies slowed, echoes changed key by half a tone. The astronomers felt a hush and glare. The merchants grumbled about the short hour. The farmers called it the held breath. And the scribes dutifully marked a dot. And now all of that drifts back toward normal, as if the world is sliding a blanket back into its usual position. The metallic taste fades, replaced by the familiar flavor of river and clay. The flies regain their enthusiasm, which is unfortunate but consistent. Echoes return to their standard voice, as if the wells have decided to stop experimenting with music. And the donkey, if you're still thinking about the donkey, resumes chewing with the calm confidence of a creature that never asked to be included in cosmic events in the first place. This is where the noon oath becomes most useful, because when ordinary light returns, the mind often tries to treat that return as a conclusion, like a neat ending, but Egypt does not really do endings. It does cycles. The sun returns, yes, but it will always leave again, and it will always travel, and it will always require attention. So the oath is not everything is fine now. The oath is continue with routine, unclasp the mirrors, return to ordinary light, and treat repairs as routine rather than spectacle. Tighten rope, repaint edge, speak the short names. All of these are actions that could be done without pride, without performance, without needing an audience. In modern terms, it is like quietly charging your phone when the battery is low, instead of making a dramatic announcement that your device is dying. It's not heroic, it's practical. And practicality, in a world as old as Egypt imagined it, is holy. If you want a sleepy kind of humor here, consider the fact that the universe is apparently held together not only by gods and spells, but by the same mindset that keeps a household running. Keep track of what you have, label things, check the clock, adjust the lamp, and stop shouting while someone is working. Ancient Egyptian religion can feel very grand, but it also feels like a place where even divine beings are expected to follow procedures. The clepsydra drips. The incense is refreshed exactly once. The names are recited like oiling hinges. And if you ever feel overwhelmed by life, it can help to remember that even Rays, the sun, has to take a detour at noon, and the detour looks suspiciously like a quiet maintenance break. If the sun can step off stage briefly, you're allowed to, too. So the two jars sit where you can imagine them, the fact jar and the fear jar. Facts are steady. Fear is contained. Neither is denied. And the counting continues in the background like a soft metronome. 12 is a number that doesn't demand intensity. It just gives you enough steps to feel movement without hurrying. 1, the hinge inside noon. 2, the crew that knows the shortcut. 3, Sokar's silence under impenetrable mountains. 4, the black heavy sand like time pulled through a narrow ring. 5, the clepsydra stitching minutes into something usable. 6, the covered mirrors on the roof, because not everything should look directly at what is happening. 7, the knots of words and breath used like bindings. 8, the nets of flame tightened with names. 9, the combing of the god, the smoothing of light. 10, the touch-up of paint, because glare is hungry. 11, the return of pulse to the deck. 12, the ordinary sun resuming its ordinary insistence. And none of this needs to be dramatic. It can be boring. It can be oddly beautiful. The best kind of bedtime myth is the kind that gives your mind just enough detail to occupy itself without getting excited. So let your imagination walk slowly along the temple roof where mirrors are being unclasped. Let it drift down to the storeroom where jars sit in a row, labeled reliable. Let it wander through the midday field where a farmer feels the hell breath and then goes back to work without making a speech. Let it sit near a well where the echo is normal again, and the water tastes like water, and someone says, "Good, the world is behaving," which is perhaps the most comforting sentence a person can say in any era. If you're still awake, you can subscribe if you like, or you can put that thought in the fear jar and close the lid gently. Either one is acceptable. The sun will keep its schedule with or without your click, and the Nile will keep moving with or without your opinion. You are allowed to be small in the best way. Small enough to rest, small enough to not manage the cosmos personally. The Egyptians had many gods for a reason. Delegation is sacred, so the noon oath remains not as a finish line, but as a soft habit. When brightness feels cruel, assume a corridor exists. Reduce your stride, count to 12, keep repairs routine. Return to ordinary light without needing applause. Let the mirrors be unclasped. Let the jars be closed. Let the day be just a day again, with its normal warmth and its normal annoyances and its normal quiet miracles hiding in plain sight. And if your thoughts keep trying to open every jar, you can gently guide them back one by one to the simplest task, breathing in and breathing out while the sun, freshly tended, keeps shining in the most ordinary way imaginable, as if nothing happened at all, and as if something always is.